My name is Evelyn, 32 years old. The china plates felt cool against my fingertips as I arranged them around my parents' mahogany dining table. The wood had been polished so aggressively I could see my reflection in it, blurred, elongated, somehow smaller than I actually was. From the kitchen, my mother's voice floated through the doorway, soft and sugar-coated, with that particular tone she reserved for smoothing over disappointments. "Yes, Ava's here," she said into the phone, her voice dropping into what she probably thought was a whisper, but carried perfectly into the dining room. "She's between opportunities right now. You know how the job market is these days." I set down the last plate, the porcelain clicking gently against the wood, and moved to the silverware drawer. Forks, knives, spoons, the familiar pattern of preparation. My hands moved on muscle memory, the rhythm calming the tightness in my chest. "Between jobs?" That was Aunt Linda's voice, sharp, curious, like a knife just testing the skin. Wasn't she between jobs last year too? "It's complicated," Mom said. I could almost see her wince. "The economy, she's very particular about what she wants to do." I folded the cloth napkins into neat triangles, corner to corner, press, place. The choreography of someone who'd been useful in the background her whole life. Let them think what they wanted. The truth lived so far outside their vocabulary that explanation felt pointless. The front door opened with a gust of cold air and expensive perfume. Jessica breezed in like a television commercial, heels clicking confidently across the hardwood, long coat swinging open to reveal a dress that had never seen a discount rack. "Is she actually helping?" she called toward the kitchen, "or just pretending to be useful?" "Jessica, please," Mom said in that half-laughing way. There was no real reproach in it. I stepped out of the dining room with a stack of serving bowls in my arms. Jessica's gaze swept over me from head to toe, taking in my simple jeans, the soft sweater with no brand visible, my hair pulled back in a plain clip. "Still dressing like you shop exclusively at thrift stores, I see," she said, inspecting her manicure. "Some things never change." "Some things don't need to," I replied, passing her on my way to the kitchen. "That," she said loudly enough for the hallway to hear, "is the spirit of a chronic underachiever. Just accept mediocrity and call it authenticity." I set the bowls on the counter. Mom fussed with the roast, pretending not to hear. Dad emerged from his study then, already wearing his reunion expression, broad smile, loud laugh, handshake ready for every guest. The successful patriarch, the man with the impressive family. His smile flickered when he saw me. "Ava," he said. "Good, you're here early." He wiped his hands on his slacks, as if preparing for a delicate procedure. "Listen, when people ask what you're doing these days, maybe just say you're consulting. It sounds better than nothing." "I'm not doing nothing, Dad," I said. Right, he replied, waving a hand. "Your little projects. I know. But to people who don't understand, it might sound like unemployment. We don't want them to worry." "Worry about what?" I asked. He looked at me the way you might look at a child trying to do multiplication in their head, gently, pitying. "About whether you're okay, whether we failed as parents somehow." Jessica's laugh echoed from the living room. Too late for that question. The doorbell rang. The first wave of relatives. Within 30 minutes, the Lynn house was full. Coats piled on the entry bench, voices overlapping, the smell of roast and perfume and wine swirling together. Uncles, aunts, cousins, and family friends who'd known me since I had crooked bangs and scraped knees. The pattern was predictable. "Ava, look at you," Aunt Mary exclaimed, hugging me too tightly. "It's been ages, so what are you up to these days?" I opened my mouth. "She's taking some time to figure things out," Mom cut in smoothly. "Still exploring her options," Dad added. "Between opportunities," Jessica repeated with a sympathetic smile sharpened into a blade. The phrase echoed all evening. Between opportunities, taking time, finding herself, said with just enough softness to sound supportive, just enough edge to sound like failure. I watched Jessica move through the crowd like it was her stage. She positioned herself strategically, near me, but not with me, making sure every conversation she joined turned into an accidental comparison. "It's such a demanding role," she was telling Uncle Robert and Aunt Mary. "Senior marketing director for a major luxury brand, but seeing my campaigns go national, billboards on Fifth Avenue, it's worth the 70-hour weeks." She glanced toward me, her smile widening. Though I suppose not everyone's cut out for that kind of pressure. "Ava was always more low-key," Uncle Robert said diplomatically. "That's one word for it." Jessica murmured, just loud enough that the circle heard. Cousin David joined, fresh off some big real estate deal, his tie loosened just enough to look successful but relaxed. The thing about success, he announced, is that you have to be willing to take risks. Too many people play it safe and wonder why nothing happens. Exactly, Jessica agreed. Some people are just afraid of real responsibility. I excused myself and went to check on the food, leaving the smell of bragging behind. In the kitchen, I found Mom and Aunt Linda leaning against the counter, deep in conversation. Have you thought about suggesting something concrete? Aunt Linda was saying. Even just part-time retail. It would give her structure. We've tried, Mom sighed. She just talks about her work, but nothing ever seems to come of it. I think she might be depressed. Oh, honey, Aunt Linda said, touching her arm. That's so hard. Has she seen someone? She won't admit there's a problem. I cleared my throat. Both their heads snapped up. Pity flooded their faces so quickly it almost knocked me back. Ava, Mom said, voice trembling a little. We were just discussing my apparent psychological crisis, I finished, opening the oven to check on the roast. I heard. We're worried about you, Mom said. It's been 3 years since you left that corporate job, and you haven't. You're not. Not what you expected, I supplied, closing the oven door gently. I know. Back in the living room, the reunion had shifted into full performance mode. Jessica had gathered a new audience. In my position, she was saying, I network with incredible people. Just last week, I had lunch with a Forbes 30 under 30 recipient. That's the kind of company successful people keep. Jessica has always been ambitious, Aunt Mary said proudly. Not everyone has that drive. Some people are followers, some are leaders, Cousin David added. Nothing wrong with being ordinary. I sat down at the edge of the circle, the conversation washing over me like cold water. Where's Ava working nowadays? Uncle James asked as he walked in, shrugging off his coat. The room went briefly quiet. Ava's on a bit of a sabbatical, Dad said, taking time to reassess her goals. For 3 years? Uncle James asked, brow creasing. Some people are late bloomers, Jessica said sweetly, though at 32, you do have to wonder when the blooming starts. Soft laughter rippled through the group. Not quite cruel, not kind either. At least she helps with family events, Mom added, scrambling to find something positive. She's very good at setting tables. There it was, the legacy. Not decades of work, not thousands of lives changed, not millions of liters of water purified. She's very good at setting tables. The laughter this time was gentler, almost tender. Somehow that made it worse. Cousin David leaned back. You know what Ava's problem is? No vision. Success requires seeing the big picture, taking strategic risks. Some people just think too small, or don't think about career at all. Some people are content just existing, Jessica said. Nothing wrong with simple living, Aunt Linda offered with a fragile smile, like offering a blanket to someone already drowning. The conversation drifted to other topics. New cars, promotions, vacations. I faded into the background of my own family gathering. Dinner was finally called. We filed into the dining room, the room I had set hours earlier. The table glowed under the chandelier, full of expensive cutlery and holiday food, and people who believed they already understood every important thing about me. I took my seat between Aunt Mary and Uncle Robert, both of whom smiled at me with the careful kindness reserved for the fragile and the failed. So, Ava, Uncle Robert said gently as he passed me the potatoes, what do you do with your time these days? Hobbies? Interests? I work, I said. You mean you're consulting? Jessica snorted from across the table. What is it you consult on again? How to avoid employment? Jessica, Dad said, but it came out thin, without weight. I met my sister's eyes across the table. She held my gaze, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. Some work, I said quietly. Doesn't need a billboard. She rolled her eyes. Convenient thing to say when you don't have anything to show. Everyone looked at me then, waiting for a defense, a breakdown, a confession. I took a sip of water. May I have the carrots, please? Jessica threw up her hands. See, no ambition, no fight, no fight, nothing. Dad changed the subject to Uncle James's new boat. They had officially stamped my file. Family failure. Cautionary tale. What happens when you waste potential? They needed me to be that, so they could feel like they weren't. What it cost me, really, was less than the energy it would take to make them see. Outside, somewhere on a small screen in a newsroom, my Time magazine cover was sitting in a folder marked Tonight. But in this room, I was just the girl who folded napkins. And for now, I let them have that. The dining room buzzed with conversation, the kind that floats above plates and silverware like harmless entertainment, except I'd learned long ago that nothing at these reunions was harmless. Everything had edges, everything cut. Aunt Mary leaned toward me as she ladled gravy onto her plate, her voice soft with concern. "So, Ava, what do you do with your time these days, dear? Any hobbies, interests?" It wasn't malicious. That almost made it worse. Her tone was the same one she used for fragile children or elderly neighbors whose memory was slipping. I set down my fork. "I work." "On what?" Jessica asked, sipping her wine with a smirk sharp enough to slice bread. "I consult," I said simply. Jessica's laugh was loud, sharp, and theatrical. "Consulting? On what exactly? Life coaching for people avoiding employment?" "Jessica," Dad said. But again, no force, no fatherly authority. The kind of Jessica you say for formality, not discipline. I met my sister's eyes. She lifted her chin slightly, waiting for me to break, to get defensive, to crumble into some justification or excuse. Instead, I turned to Aunt Mary. "May I have the carrots, please?" Aunt Mary blinked, thrust the bowl toward me, and tried, unsuccessfully, to erase the pity melting across her face. Conversation moved on. Boats, bonuses, stock options, vacation plans. It rose around me like steam, repetitive and empty in a way that made you forget what real substance felt like. But then it shifted. "But you know what Ava's problem is?" Cousin David announced, leaning back like he was about to deliver a TED Talk nobody asked for. "She has no vision." "Oh." Jessica nodded eagerly, sensing another opening. "Success requires risk. You have to move, hustle, build something, not just drift. Some people," David continued, "just think too small." "Or don't think about career at all," Jessica added sweetly. "Some people are content, merely existing." Uncle James laughed. "Nothing wrong with simple living." Except the way he said it made it clear he thought simple living was failure dressed in handmade sweaters. The conversation rolled on, gaining momentum now that they'd found their favorite topic, diagnosing me. I felt the weight of their attention, their assumptions, their whispered deficiencies, circling like vultures waiting for me to confess what they'd always believed. But I didn't. Dad cleared his throat loudly, pivoting the dinner conversation before the tension became something impolite. He launched into a monologue about his friend's new yacht. Everyone leaned in. Laughter returned. But the stain had already spread. I'd been filed, labeled, sorted neatly into family concern with a subtitle, Wasted Potential. After dinner, plates were cleared as if the earlier jabs had never happened. I carried dishes to the kitchen, letting the warm water run over my wrists. That's when I heard it again, the voices. Cousin David, louder now after a few drinks. "The economy is tough, sure, but winners find a way. They network, they make moves. The people who fail, they give up, they stop trying." "And Ava's not even trying anymore," Jessica said. "She's accepted being, well, a loser." "Jessica!" Mom said sharply. But there was no outrage, only embarrassment that her child said the quiet part out loud. "What word should I use?" Jessica demanded. "Underachiever? Unmotivated? It's the same thing." My hands stilled under the running water. I had listened to enough. The voices grew quieter as I stepped further into the kitchen, and when I reached for a towel, Aunt Mary materialized behind me, wringing her hands. "Ava, honey," she said gently, "can we talk?" I nodded. "We don't judge you," she said, placing a warm hand over mine. "Family is family, successful or not." "I appreciate that," I replied. "But I do worry," she continued. "You're so isolated. No career path we can see. No clear direction. It's not healthy." Her eyes filled with soft tears. "Have you thought about talking to someone? A therapist? Someone who can help you process things before it gets worse?" Before I could respond, Aunt Linda rushed into the kitchen, clutching her phone like it might detonate. "Turn on the TV," she gasped. "Living room, now!" Her voice had the urgency of someone announcing a house fire. The entire room shifted. Chairs scraped, cousins murmured, footsteps echoed. Everyone moved as if pulled by one thread. The television clicked on. A news anchor appeared, sitting behind a sleek desk. What happened next didn't feel real. It felt like watching my life play on a screen in a world where the rules were reversed. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Time Magazine, Person of the Year, Dr. Ava Lynn." The room inhaled collectively. My face filled the screen, larger than life, framed by the United Nations building behind me. Dr. Ava Lynn, the anchor announced, is the 2024 Person of the Year for her revolutionary work in global health infrastructure, providing sustainable access to clean water and medical systems for over 50 million people across 3 continents. Silence. Not the awkward silence from before. This was a silence that rewrites the oxygen in a room. Footage rolled of me in hard hats, overseeing construction teams, shaking hands with ministers, walking through rural clinics, kneeling beside children at a water pump as clean water cascaded for the first time in their village. The anchor continued. Her foundation's innovative combination of advanced filtration technology and community-based maintenance has become a global model. Her work, praised by the World Health Organization and UNICEF, has demonstrably reduced disease rates in dozens of regions. Another image, me shaking hands with the UN Secretary General. Mom made a soft choking sound. Someone dropped a fork. Then, and today, the anchor said, smiling, Time magazine has named her Person of the Year, recognizing her unparalleled impact on global health equity. The screen filled with the magazine cover. The Changemaker. How one woman rebuilt health systems across the world, with my face beneath the title. In the living room, the only sound was the soft hum of the heater. All eyes turned to me, some wide, some glassy, some disbelieving. Mom's voice cracked like thin ice. You're Person of the Year. I set the plate in my hand gently on the counter. It's just a title, I said. But their faces told me the title had just shattered their entire perception of me. For a long, suspended moment, no one in the living room moved. Not a breath, not a twitch, only the flicker of the TV reflecting in wide, stunned eyes. It was Jessica who broke the silence, not with words, but with a small, strangled sound, somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. She clutched her phone like a lifeline as the room slowly came back to life around her. Dad blinked hard, as though trying to force his brain to reboot. Turn that up, he whispered. Uncle James grabbed the remote with trembling fingers and raised the volume. Dr. Lynn's foundation currently oversees more than 700 clean water sites, the anchor continued. Her work has been credited with lowering childhood disease rates by up to 60% in the regions where her systems operate. The screen shifted to a video clip, one I remembered painfully well. I was standing next to a shallow river in rural Ethiopia, explaining filtration mechanisms to a group of local engineers. Sweat clung to my neck. My boots were coated in red dirt. The sun beat down so hard the horizon warped. Jessica stared, slack-jawed. That's you? She breathed. Yes, I said softly. Dad removed his glasses and wiped them with the hem of his shirt, his hand shaking. It can't be, he murmured. You've been here, at home, between jobs. You said you were consulting. I do consult, I said, just not on retail or branding. Mom's face crumpled all at once. Ava, she whispered, why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air with the same weight as an accusation. I met her gaze evenly, because no one asked what I actually do. You only asked if I had a job. The next segment rolled. Photos of me shaking hands with presidents, touring a facility with the Dalai Lama, speaking at a global health summit, cutting a ribbon in a village where children danced in circles around a new water pipe. Mom covered her mouth as tears slipped past her fingers. Aunt Linda whispered, My God. Aunt Mary sat down heavily, like her knees had buckled beneath her. Cousin David, Mr. Winners Take Risks, was scrolling rapidly through news articles on his phone, his earlier arrogance dissolving into disbelief. This says you have a doctorate from MIT, he said, voice cracking, and a master's from Johns Hopkins, and 19 published papers? 18, I corrected gently. The 19th is still in review. Jessica looked like someone had pulled the earth out from under her. I told everyone, her voice faltered. I told them you were a loser. I heard, I said. Her makeup had started to smudge, the sharp lines of her eyeliner blurring into something almost childlike. Ava, I didn't know. If I'd known. But you didn't want to know, I said softly. You wanted a version of me that made you feel like the successful one. The TV shifted again, this time to a clip of an interviewer speaking to me 6 months ago. Some have criticized your approach as too radical, the interviewer said on screen. I replied, if everyone's comfortable with your methods, you're probably not solving the real problem. In the living room, Jessica let out a broken laugh. You talk like that? On TV, with world leaders? I talk like that everywhere, I said. You've just never asked me anything that required more than a one-sentence answer. Dad looked up from his phone, pale. It says here you've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Twice. That's speculation, I replied, not official. But why didn't you tell us? Mom demanded again, her voice thick with hurt and shame. I turned toward her. When I left my corporate job, I told you I was starting a humanitarian foundation, I said. You told me I was throwing away my career, that I was being naive, that I'd suffer. Jessica said I was stupid. Jessica flinched. So I stopped explaining, I continued. I chose to do the work instead of justify it. Aunt Mary stepped forward, tears in her eyes. I said you needed therapy, that you were depressed. You were worried, I said calmly. But your worry was based on the assumption that my life had fallen apart, not on any evidence. Cousin David shook his head slowly. I lectured you about taking risks. And you were right, I said. I took the biggest risk of my life. I bet everything on work most people don't even want to think about. Dad sank into a chair. All this time, all these reunions, we treated you like a failure. You treated me like someone you didn't understand, I said. So you filled in the gaps with your own fears and insecurities. Most people do that. But you let us, Jessica whispered. Why didn't you correct us? Because correcting you wasn't my job, I replied. My job was to build water systems for people who didn't have them. Your assumptions didn't change that. The room fell silent again. Not the stunned silence from moments before, but something heavier. Something full of every unspoken word from the last 3 years. Mom stepped closer. Ava, sweetheart, we're so proud of you. I held her gaze steadily. You don't have to be proud. You just have to see me clearly now. Jessica wiped her cheeks. I want to understand you. Really understand. I just don't know where to start. Start by asking questions, I said gently. Start by listening to answers longer than 5 words. Start by believing success comes in forms you don't recognize. Uncle James cleared his throat. And start by admitting we were all wrong. I nodded slightly. That's a good start. The TV continued playing quietly behind us. Images of my work, my teams, my projects, my years away. The life they'd never bothered to look for. Mom reached for my hand. Ava, can we talk? Really talk? I took a slow breath, the weight of years shifting inside me. We can, I said softly, but not tonight. The room exhaled. Tonight belonged to clarity, to consequences, to truth they were finally forced to face. I stood, gently removed my hand, and walked toward the kitchen sink where the half-washed dishes waited. I rinsed a plate beneath warm water, letting the silence settle behind me, letting them process everything they'd never wanted to know. Behind me, I heard Jessica whisper to Mom, her voice trembling. She's not the failure in this family. We are. I closed my eyes briefly. Not triumph, just truth. I washed the last dish slowly, letting the warm water run over my hands as the weight of the evening settled behind me. The house, once full of chatter and layered conversations, had fallen into a stunned quiet. Not peaceful, shaken. As though everyone was breathing for the first time with their eyes open. Footsteps approached the kitchen. Jessica's. Her reflection appeared in the dark window above the sink, mascara smudged, eyeliner feathered, eyes red and glassy. She looked younger somehow, smaller, like the costume of perfect overachiever she always wore had been peeled back. Ava, she said, voice barely above a whisper, can we talk? I dried my hands on a towel. We are talking. No, can we really talk? I nodded once. She leaned against the counter like her legs couldn't quite hold her. I don't know what to say, she started. I feel like I've been living in a funhouse mirror. Everything warped. Everything wrong. I spent years being proud of myself because I thought I was better than you. Her throat tightened. And tonight I realized I never even knew who you were. I didn't answer. Silence is sometimes kinder than words. Jessica swallowed hard. I called you a loser, multiple times. I mocked you in front of everyone. I acted like I was the sun, and you were some satellite orbiting me. You didn't know the truth, I said quietly. But I didn't want to know, she shot back. That's worse. I stayed still, letting her wrestle with what she had buried. I built my identity on being the successful sister, she said, voice trembling. It was the only thing I felt I had. And now? She looked at me, terrified and honest. Next to you, I feel insignificant. I stepped forward. Jessica, I said softly, your worth was never measured against me. You made me your yardstick. I never asked for that. Tears welled again. Then why? She pressed her fingers to her forehead. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you correct us? All those times we belittled you? Why didn't you put us in our place? Because I didn't need to, I said. My work wasn't diminished because you misunderstood it. Clean water still reached villages, infants still lived, disease rates still dropped. The world didn't need you to understand me for the work to matter. Her chin quivered. It hurts, she said, knowing I judged you for being invisible. You weren't judging me, I said. You were judging your own fear of being ordinary. She broke then, shoulders shaking, hands covering her face. I let her cry. I had no interest in gloating, only in truth. When she finally steadied her breath, she whispered, "Can you forgive me?" I considered her, really considered her. Jessica wasn't cruel at her core. She was frightened and insecure and taught from childhood that success was a hierarchy and she had to stay near the top to be loved. "There is nothing to forgive," I said gently. "You treated me based on what you believed. Now that you know the truth, you can choose differently." "Choose differently," she echoed, like she was tasting the words for the first time. Mom appeared in the doorway next, eyes swollen, cheeks blotchy, a tremor in her hands. "Ava," she whispered. "Sweetheart, please don't leave yet. We need to talk about this properly, as a family." Dad stood behind her, shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen. The confident patriarch had melted into a man grappling with the realization that he hadn't known his own daughter for years. "We're proud of you," Mom blurted. "So proud. We just didn't know. We didn't see. You didn't ask," I said softly. Her breath hitched. "You asked if I had a job, not what I did. You asked if I was okay, not why. You asked who I was dating, not who I was becoming." Dad rubbed a hand over his face. "We should have listened. We should have been curious. Should-haves hung between us like ghosts." I stepped toward them both. "I love you," I said. "I never stopped. But I couldn't live my life trying to prove myself to you. The work needed me, and I chose it." Mom's tears spilled again. "We want to be part of your life, really part of it." "You are part of my life," I replied. "Just not the center of it. My work is the center. My purpose is the center. If you want to meet me where I am, truly meet me, I will always make room." Dad nodded slowly, humbled. "We'll try." That's all I ask. I slipped on my coat. Jessica tried to say something, but only managed a small nod, gratitude and grief tangled in her expression. As I stepped outside, the crisp night air wrapped around me like clarity. "Ava!" a voice called. Uncle Chen shuffled down the walkway, hands clasped behind his back, wisdom etched into the lines of his face. "You handled that well," he said, stopping beside me. "Very well." "I feel like I broke something," I admitted. "In them." "You did," he said calmly. "You broke their illusions that needed shattering." He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "People who love you for who they think you are will always struggle when they finally meet who you actually are. But it's better this way. Better for them to know the truth, even if it humbles them." I nodded slowly. "What if they can't accept it?" I asked. "Then you love them from a distance," he said. "A truthful distance, not the polite disguise you've lived in." His eyes softened. "Your grandmother would be proud. She always said the work that matters most rarely fits into the stories people expect." I breathed deeply. The night felt still, reverent. When I finally drove home, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from colleagues, donors, journalists, global partners. But I didn't check them yet. Instead, I walked into my quiet apartment, removed my coat, and stood by the window. City lights glowed below, life pulsed forward. Tomorrow, I'd speak to the Kenyan Health Ministry, review water purity reports from Bangladesh, approve grant proposals for rural clinics in India. The world didn't care about tonight's drama. The work didn't pause because my family finally saw me. And that, I realized, was its own kind of peace. 50 million people had clean water, whether my family thought I was unemployed or extraordinary. Their belated recognition changed nothing. The work was the point. The work was always the point. I whispered into my living room, into the quiet truth of my life. I don't need anyone to understand me. I just need to keep going. And I would.